Hi, all. This is Selena here. Welcome to Genetics at a Glance. Today, we are going to go over a Strategene report. The report I do have is an older one from back in 2016 or 2017. So the newer one is a little bit updated, but the concepts are still the same. So first, you have a key here, and this is kind of going to give us like how we can look at all these other pathways, and they're relatively simple here. We're just going to follow arrows and just kind of look at these other colors and some of these other symbols. So we'll start at the top here. Well, first we'll start at the bottom where we have these different types of genes. So first you're going to look at, okay, this blue here means no SNP data. And what that means is that it was not in your raw data. They can't tell you whether or not this was a wild type, heterozygous, or homozygous. The green is wild type, and wild type means no variations. The heterozygous, or this yellow dotted line, means you have one variant, and the red dotted line means you have two variants, or homozygous. So that's kind of like the key of looking at the gene part. And then looking at the gene, you see these other things, the cofactor and these other ones. This cofactor is a little kind of like curved arrow. Cofactors are other building blocks or other ingredients that are needed for that gene to work. So it's kind of like you've got whatever's going on with that enzyme, well, we need these other pieces of the puzzle to make this all work, or there's all these ingredients to make this pathway work. So that's the cofactors. Increasing activity, these are things which will increase that gene's activity, which has nothing to do with whether or not you have a SNP or not. So just in a normal wild type setting, these things will kind of turn on, push those genes. The decreased activity slows down the genes or kind of turns them off. So looking at those, that's where we look at the environment and putting our genes into context. We're going to look at, okay, do we have these other things? And sometimes it's other cofactors that will slow down or speed up. So that's where you kind of, as you go through the pathways, just kind of look at this core is like the key to looking at the pathways. So we're going to scroll down here. You'll have your gene list, and then we'll get to the folate pathway here. So let's look at the folate pathway. When you get to these pathways, you basically just follow the arrows. So it's going to start at one end and you just kind of keep following the arrows. You will notice there's a lot of circles. So there's a lot of things where there's like a bidirectional relationship, or there's a cycle that just goes around and around and around. And that's where it's really important to look at the context, look at cofactors, and look at that bigger picture, because you can have this cycle kind of get caught somewhere. And so we want to make sure that we're looking at that bigger picture. So folate here, when we look at this, you can see in the purple, these are things which will slow down some of these pathways. So even if you don't have any SNPs here, it's going to slow those things down. There's other things that will kind of speed up these pathways. And then we also see there's cofactors here, like NADPH. We're going to see throughout. This actually kind of comes from another pathway. It eventually comes from like the neurotransmitter, the biopterin pathway, NAD, which also leads to NADPH and other things. But there's going to be, you'll see a theme here of some of these cofactors that you're going to see throughout. And that's why it's really important, because these genes, if they don't have the rest of the ingredients, they're going to be slow, whether or not you have a variation or not. So when you go down here, we have the folate that's going to come in here through folate receptor 1, and it's going to go down here to the DHF. Folic acid, however, comes here through folate receptor 2, and folic acid also can slow down the same receptor that it has to come through, the DHFR. So that's why it's really important to look at the foods that we're eating, and eating foods that our body recognizes that's not going to slow down pathways that we really need to work. And you keep going down here, it's going to come straight down, and then there's going to be a couple other side, like this little recycling here that happens. We're going to have some kind of bidirectional here through the Schmidt gene, the SHMT gene. And then down here, MTHFR, that's the one we hear so much about, and probably why many of you are probably watching this, because you know about MTHFR and you're starting to delve into genetics. So MTHFR is just one gene of hundreds and hundreds of thousands of genes. We have tons of genes, tons of SNPs. And so just focusing on the one is like looking at just a blade of grass out in your yard. So we've got to put it into context and look at the things that, what else are involved in that. So what's really key here is looking at a lot of these greens, which are cofactors that we need. And looking even on some of these side parts of this pathway, what are cofactors needed here? What are things that slow it down? Like here, we've got nitric oxide, lead, mercury, hydrogen peroxide, these kinds of things, the TNF alpha, copper, aluminum. So these things will slow down MTR, which that's what comes after MTHFR. And MTRs are really important because that's what kind of helps connect to the rest of the methylation pathway. But just looking at the folic acid cycle, just follow the arrows down. You can look at things which are going to be cofactors, speed up and slow down. And again, these have nothing to do with whether or not you have a SNP. These are going to influence those genes whether you have a SNP or not. So they're not saying, okay, you need to take these things or avoid these things. Well, the slowdowns you probably mostly want to avoid, but these are not like telling you what to do and what to take, just helping you to put things into context. You do need to make sure that you do, though, have the cofactors in your diet. I wouldn't run out and go get supplements just because, oh, this is a cofactor here. That's where it's really important to make sure we're eating really good foods and just get a good picture of what our foods are. And I will also share a link of a place where I like to do that at is nutritiondata.self.com, where you can put in the foods you're eating and it will break down all your micronutrients. And it just gives you a really good snapshot. So you can see that, oh, look, I'm getting enough folate, or, oh, I'm really not getting enough magnesium throughout my day, or I'm not getting enough selenium. And so then you know which foods you can go eat more, but there's links on there where you can click, oh, I need more foods rich in selenium. Click on that, and then you can know, oh, this is how I can increase my diet. I always recommend starting with food because our body recognizes that and it assimilates that so much better. And there are other cofactors involved. When we eat whole foods, we're going to get the rest of the other phytochemicals and all the other things that our body needs to utilize those. So if you keep going on, you'll have the description, okay, what your symptoms or what your SNPs were and what that really means. Some of the factors which influence that. So it's really important here, especially if you see SAM. A lot of times it has a lowercase e and it's SAM-E is what you'd usually refer to. This one here is actually made down here in the methionine cycle. And this is super important because right over here, I don't know if I can get a highlighter here, if this will highlight. So over here is SAM-E, oops, just the SAM. That's going to be often used throughout our body in over 100 other processes. And it's super, super important that this methionine cycle is working well. So what I mentioned MTR just a minute ago here, which is right over here on the left, your folate's going to come in from that. This is what kind of connects the folate with the methionine cycle and kind of gives us our methylation cycle, so to speak. So B12 is right here, this little circle right here next to MTR. So methyl B12 comes in, methylfolate comes in, but we also need zinc as the cofactor right here. You see the zinc cofactor. And then homocysteine has to come up here. So there's 4 things that have to happen of these building blocks for this methionine cycle to spin. So just focusing only on MTHFR, if we don't have those other ingredients, we're still going to have a problem in our methionine cycle. On top of that, we can look at the things which will influence this pathway, which will slow it down and speed it up. For instance, the slowing down the heavy metals again, nitric oxide, TNF alpha, we talked about those. So we got to make sure that we have those things available or not that are not hindering us, to slow that down. And then we go back here to before to get methylcobalamin, we need things like the SAM-E, FAD, and NAD. These are so important. So it's really interesting how our body is made because it makes the very things that our body needs. So if this cycle here isn't making enough, it automatically slows down on its own, which really puts us in a really bad catch-22. So this NAD we're going to find later on here in that biopterin, or usually called like our neurotransmitter cycle. So those 3 cycles I talk a lot about, the methylation, transsulfuration, and the biopterin cycle, because they are so closely related and they've got cofactors that they make that they are used in other places, and they kind of help keep one another running. But whenever you get one of them out of balance, that means they fall apart really quickly and slow down really quickly. So again, here is just like the methionine, the folate cycle, we just follow the arrows. There's different ways that this methionine cycle has several ways that homocysteine we hear a lot about can go kind of 3 ways to get 3 ways that it can go. 2 of them go to methionine. 1 of them actually is excreted out of the body. These 2 words recycled, it goes back through MTR with the methyl B12 and the methylfolate to make methionine, or it can go up through BHMT to make methionine. When it goes those routes, it's basically going to just keep recycling here. So we're not going to see much of a change in levels because we're just going to kind of keep recycling it as it goes. Whenever it goes down to the transsulfuration pathway through the CBS gene, that's where it's going to basically eventually kind of get eliminated out of the body. We're not going to recycle that cysteine at all. It's going to go out. So those are the 3 ways that it kind of can go. And so we'll go to the next one here. This kind of goes over your methionine. The transsulfuration here is that detox pathway. And right here is that CBS where we just saw at the bottom of the methionine cycle. And this goes down into the detox. And again, we just follow arrows and you see there's a lot of recycling, glutathione. There's some recycling that goes on here, and that's why I'm usually not a fan of just jumping out and taking glutathione, because if you can't recycle it, you can create more oxidative stress. And that's part of why a lot of people they get really ill with that, because now they're creating more stress and their body can't get this recycled. We also see where there's a lot of NAD and NADP, NADPH cofactors involved in some of these genes working, which is really, really important to look at. We could also look at these things which are slowing them down. And it's usually a common theme, like heavy metals, infections, pathogens, our immune response, inflammation response, those kinds of things often will slow this down because it puts a heavy burden on these pathways. So there's going to be, I think, a chart that kind of goes through all of these and connects them together here as we go through farther down. Oh, no, let's get to this one first. So this is your neurotransmitter pathway, the biopterin pathway. Right over here is where that NAD is made. And so this one is really, really super important. So things kind of come here through the top, and this one can kind of be a little confusing, but there's different ways these things come. The tryptophan pathway can go over here to make serotonin, which goes to make melatonin, which we always think of, oh, it's going to make us sleepy. Or the tryptophan goes over here to make NAD. And a lot of times the quinolic acid is spoken about because it's very excitatory. And we see this a lot in anxiety, in autism, ADHD, any of these like neurological situations. A lot of times we see an elevation in quinolic acid. And we're like, oh, we need to stop things going that way because we're pushing this quinolic acid is high. And what we're missing in many situations, what a lot of I see in the natural and functional medicine world is they think, oh, we need to stop that. No, what's happening is that this NAD sends a feedback. So if it's not getting enough NAD, then there's still a signal saying, hey, we need more. The body needs that NAD for these high stressful situations. And I wish Ben would put a little bit farther down here what comes after NAD. We get NADPH, NADP, NADH. There's other things that NAD also turns into that are vital for our transsulfuration pathway, vital for our methionine cycle. And so we really, really need that. We see there's NAD is needed over here on this other side, like over here, we need over here like for our dopamine. So it's super, super important that we have this pathway working and not look at, oh, quinolic acid is bad, we need to stop that. We need to step back and say, why is the body making that? What is it needing? And so if it's not getting enough NAD, it's going to keep pushing things that way, trying to get at least something through. So it's really, really important when we're looking at neurotransmitter imbalances to really look at that bigger picture and not just jump out on, oh, this is really bad, let's go do something about it. No, let's look at why is the body doing that? Because rarely does our body do bad things and bad symptoms for no reason. There's sometimes a lot of collateral damage, but there's a reason why. So if we can unclog that path, then now things can flow and things can resolve and level out, and we can return to balance. So this is some of the things just to really look at. Tyrosine goes over here to our dopamine. Tyrosine is also a part of our thyroid hormones. So whenever we see imbalances like in thyroid hormones, you also got to start thinking what's going on with tyrosine. We can get something called NOS uncoupling here. So NOS uncoupling is important because this is what can lead to the Fenton reaction and lead to a lot more oxidative stress and put a ton of burden on our transsulfuration, our detox pathway. So it's really important that we have all of this working really, really well. And again, like I said, just follow the arrows down, look at the cofactors that are involved, look at things which slow these things down and things which will speed them up. So we can go down here to the next one is the histamine pathway. And again, we just follow the arrows. There's different ways that histamine can go. We think that, oh, there's just like one histamine. There's not. There's intracellular and there's extracellular histamine. So we need to look at that. And again, put these things into context, look at things which speed them up, which slow them down. Look at the cofactors involved. Again, we're going to see the SAMe, which is just labeled as SAM here. We see the NAD, we see zinc, like zinc we see throughout the B vitamins. Here's that NADPH. So we always have like kind of this common theme, and why it always goes back to let's do the core and focus on the core when we're trying to achieve health. That's why I really like the book Dirty Genes. Really helps to put that into context. And I mean, it's very simple, but yet, things are so complex, and sometimes we have to go beyond just the basics, but we have to have the basics no matter what. So hopefully the basics will really resolve most health issues. If it doesn't, you still have to do those basics anyway. After that, I think there's just some bonus snips. I think that's the end of report. There was one report that kind of puts all of those together, which is really nice. And let me see if I can find that chart real quick here. Just a moment. Look at this here, in the middle here. These are the 3 cycles that we just spoke about, the methylation, which is the folate methionine, transsulfuration, and the biopterin cycles. So over here on the right here is where, the top right is where that folate and methionine cycle is. And then you see over on the bottom right is the transsulfuration and detox, and then over on the top left is over our neurotransmitters, the biopterin cycle all connects. So you can see how all 3 of these cycles, or it's kind of 4, really work very closely together, and how we have the things like the CME over here on the top right gets used all over, and then the NAD over here on the left gets used all over. So that's why it's also really important that we look at these things and we don't think that, oh, just because we have like really high quinolic acid, all of a sudden we need to stop that pathway. It's just really vital that we understand, why is the body sending things those directions. If it's not getting enough NAD, there's going to be a feedback saying, hey, we need more. It's going to keep putting things, hoping a little bit trickles through. So this kind of shows you how they're connected and gives you a good overview. If you've got any questions, you can reach out to me. I look forward to answering any questions. I always like helping everyone to be empowered, to take charge of your health, because these things are really simple. I mean, they're complex, but really the concepts are very basic. And I just love how Dr. Lynch has put these together to make it accessible to anyone. Again, you all reach out to me if you have any questions, and have a great day. Take care.